Inside the mind of Red Lake High School shooter Jeff Weiss. A lot of world's recorded serial killers haven't been often thought out to be one. In most movies, it is always typical that they would always be indifferent, antisocial, violent, and creepy. But in real life, they could always be among us. They could be the most normal people in the spectrum of normality, and you still cannot tell what goes on in their minds, because when they speak to you, he's just any other nice guy out there. But he's been secretly plotting your murder. This is the case for the teenage Red Lake shooter of Minneapolis, Minnesota, Jeff Weiss. If you're quite familiar with the case, the Red Lake Massacre was a school shooting that happened around 2005, killing almost 9 people and injuring 5 others before he eventually committed suicide. Now, just like a lot of villain origin stories, there's always some traumatic background or experience that a killer would have endured before committing unspeakable atrocities. And it always starts at home, and Jeff Weiss' story is not anything sort of a different. The guy had quite rough childhood, and even as a baby, it seemed as tough. His life path was already set up to be as dark as it had been, and here's why. Jeff Weiss was born on 8th of August 1988 and was a known descendant of the Ojibwe, a Native American tribe, and had lived in Minnesota for all of his life. He was born as the first and only child out of wedlock that resided in a place called Red Lake. Back when Weiss was just 3 months old, his father, Darrell Lucier Jr., had wanted to claim full custody over him, but was subsequently reclaimed by his mother when he was 3 years old. There weren't many much-known facts about his life with his father during that time frame, but many have attested that growing up with his alcoholic mother, Joanne, he was often physically and emotionally abused. And to add fuel to the fire, Joanne had begun dating Timothy Troy Desjardins in 1992. And he had also been reported to have abused him as a child at some point. Everything was messy for him from that, and went on with a lot more turning worse, as in 1997. His father committed suicide as he shot himself with a shotgun after having a standoff with the police for 2 days. It was not enough that he had lost his father, but a few more years later, in 1999, he would also be losing his mother. His mother had then gotten involved in a car accident with one of her cousins, and while she had survived the incident, she was left just like an empty shell, because the brain damage she had sustained was too severe that she had to be checked into a mental institution. And with no one else left, Weiss was taken in by his paternal grandmother, Shelda, and 2 of his aunts. Because of the many tragic and disruptive events that happened in his life, he would often be moving from one place to another, promoting him to attend a number of different schools early in his life. He was also forced to repeat his 8th grade because he had failed a bunch of classes and has always been troublesome in school. Along with all of this was that he also had to endure bullying from other students that were mainly due to his physical appearance and fashion sense of wanting to wear everything in black. When he started high school, he then enrolled into Red Lake Senior High School in 2003. Little did people know that this would be his soon-to-be scene of the crime. Now, remember when I said that the killers might not seem like it, and they might even be among us? This is what Weiss' teacher and classmates had seen him. He was just like any other goth kid, and although some of his behaviors were pretty suspicious and troubling, he was not the type of person to be inclined in violent things. One thing was for sure though, Weiss wasn't a loner. He had friends and didn't have much trouble making some. But with everything that went wrong with his life, it was eventual that he will come back to those traumatic moments and wallow in those as he became depressed later on. He had also felt like there was nothing in store for him as he thought that he was just living to dig a grave for himself, and that others had also been living for things that were too pointless. There had also been a time in his life that Weiss displayed and advocated for a very troubling cause, such as his grand belief in Nazism and his admiration for German dictator Adolf Hitler. It was also reported that he tried to aggressively convert several others of his Native American tribe to follow him with the same path. There was something quite interesting that happened, though, that could have been the biggest red flag about him, and that would have been a good warning for everyone about him. He had once threatened, and I quote, to shoot up the entire Red Lake High School on April 20th, significantly because it was Hitler's birthday, and it is also coincidence with the 5th anniversary of the Columbine High School massacre. Well, technically, many people were concerned and saw it as a red flag, but what they did to avoid the chances of a massacre from actually happening in their school was to expel him from a public schooling. But, of course, that will never hold up much to anything, because he still axes despite the discouragement. Another known fact about him was that two of his favorite films were Elephant and Zero Day, and he would often just skip to the parts wherein the massacre and killings would happen. It is as if he was watching something that could make up his massacre blueprint. In 2004, just like his father, Weiss attempted to commit suicide, but things had came up that made him change his mind. But he attempted it again for the second time, but this time it failed. By then, he needed to be hospitalized. His aunts thought it was very concerning, so he continued in that way and was continuously prescribed several medications, some counseling sessions, and prescriptions for an antidepressant called Prozac. As time passed by, they were suspicious that the dosage for his antidepressants was increased, and his aunts were concerned about how necessary it was and whether it had adverse effects on Weiss' behavior. Their instincts were right, and in 2005, it seemed as thought it had affected Weiss too much and too bad. It had been alleged that by the time Weiss had done his crime, the dosage for his antidepressant was already at 60 milligrams per day. And to make matter worse, the doctor who was supposed to be responsible for him had been a no-show a few days prior. Weiss had finally snapped one day, and there was nothing else that he could do but just went on a killing everyone he could. The first victim, the grandfather that took him in when he had no one else. It wasn't enough that he put a bullet through him, but he had to trigger the gun a couple more times to make sure that he was as cold as ice. It was also a very weird question as to how, in the first place, did Weiss obtain a gun, and how on earth was he even able to keep it undetected? Moving on to his next victims. He stole two of his grandfather's police-issued guns and his grandfather's girlfriend. And as it was the climax of the whole plot for a massacre, he went over to drive to the school that had expelled him in a squad car, and then shot unarmed security to enter. When he got inside the premises, he shot as many students as he could, including one teacher, and injured almost 3. What seemed to be pretty creepy and disturbing was that before he shot one student, he first asked him if he believed in God. No one knew exactly if it was anything personal to him, but it was reassembling to another massacre in the Columbine High School. When he had enough blood on his hands already, law enforcement had managed to reach the school, and they engaged in a shootout. Weiss was wounded in the abdomen and the arm, and the police had thought that they got him already, but they didn't. He retreated and hid in an empty classroom, and then committed suicide by pulling the trigger on himself as his last act of killing. During the time all of these unimaginable events had happened, Jeff Weiss was only 16 years old. That's a lot to take in, right? And the dude was just 16. That's more absurd than anything else in this world. What do you guys think? What should have been done instead for the massacre to have been avoided? Let us know in the comment section down below. Please, don't forget to like and subscribe for more of our videos.